A warm welcome to this presentation where we're continuing with the X3 webinar, where today we are looking at the automated folder backups. Please feel free to use the chat option to post your questions, and also to use the chat and the reactions if you want to ask your questions at the end of the session. And they will be, this session is being recorded, and if you want to have a copy of this recording, you will find it on our YouTube channel, where we will post it at the end of the day. So without wasting much time, handing over to Rainier. Take it away, Rainier.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and start with a presentation. Hope you all can hear me. I'm sure you can. It's always quite strange doing these webinars when you can't really hear the response in the background. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll kick it off. Good morning, everyone. My name is Renier Pienaar. I'm sure most of you know. I've been a technical consultant at Sage for 15 years now. Just gone to 15. That's 15, not 50. Luckily. We'll be reviewing the X3 automated folder backups during this webinar. I would kindly like to ask for your support. At the end of the presentation, we'll basically share a blog, a link to a blog that I'd like you to please like. If you like it, I'll see it as an indication that you've liked the content and that we can continue doing these type of presentations. So let's kick off with the content. I'll carry on to the next slide, and we'll start with the X3 automated folder backups review. If there's one thing that I've learned in the 30-odd years that I've been involved in IT is basically you cannot have enough backups. And using folder backups is a great way to implement a working and effective and quick DR solution. Here we'll have a basic review of the automated folder backups under this section. And then we're going to have a look at the basic disaster recovery. Just basic disaster recovery, what does it entail? It's important to understand this concept, and it's basically across the board. These concepts that we're going to share with you is used by everyone, data centers and every single big company out there that's taking disaster recovery seriously. We'll be using basic disaster recovery methodology that we'll share with you during this presentation. Then we're also going to have a look at the audience. Who should consider automated folder backups? In my opinion, it's basically everyone. I'll state it again. You should always consider automated folder backups. It's very important to have redundancy as far as backups is concerned, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later as well, the audience. Then the automated backups folders. It's very important to basically go through the steps and also understanding the actual key elements that we're backing up when we're backing up a complete folder. And we'll go through those various elements in this topic. Then we'll also have a brief look at the SVG data extraction. Now, as we all know, the SVG data extraction, the actual table data is extracted when we run the SVG data extraction. And without this step, the folder backup is basically pointless. So very important to do this particular step, and we'll have a look at that as well. We'll also be reviewing the actual script inside of VM. And yeah, I'm thinking of basically kicking this off a little bit earlier because I don't want to be wasting your time. I think what we should do is just before Q&A, I'm hoping that you guys will have a lot of questions and we can cover those. While we're covering the questions, we can basically run the script, and I'll show you the folder that I'm going to be using is obviously a seed folder, which is not that big. So the seed folder can be copied and backed up within, I would say, about 10 to 15 minutes. So in other words, it won't take that long. We're not going to be running SVG data extraction, so we'll just rely on the existing one that's in the system. But we'll review the whole process within a VM. And then we'll have closing comments and also the Q&A just before we close off. So let's get into it. I will start with X3 automated folder backups. So why is it important to have X3 folder backups? Simply because we've noticed in the field, and this is specifically smaller companies and smaller business partners where there is absolutely no DR in place. And having a DR like this, where you're simply just taking folder backups and making it available to all our business partners, gives them the tools and the ability to basically create folder backups. And also store these backups off-site, ideally. So make sure that you keep them off-site in the event that the entire IT infrastructure, for example, burns down. You would want to have off-site backup or some other form of disaster that might happen. So therefore, we've decided to share this with everyone and have a quick and effective and simple way to have a solid DR in place, and customers can then use the solution or consider this particular solution. So which versions of Sage X3 support our folder backup script? Basically all versions. So we've made it completely dynamic, so it can basically be used on all versions of Sage X3. And then we're just stating the obvious, it is dynamic. So the entire process is automated from the SVG data extraction, which we basically automate using the task scheduler within X3 itself. We can then basically automate even that part of it. So then again, it uses 3 key arguments to basically create the script dynamically, and those arguments are basically fed through the Windows task scheduler. So we basically configure those within the Windows task scheduler, very similar to our MongoDB log file rotation, basically. And we'll have a look at the Windows task scheduler. I'll actually configure it within the image that we're going to be looking at or reviewing this on, and that's going to be our automated folder backups. Then there's 6 stages to the folder backup, of which the one stage basically happens inside X3. It's very important to do this stage first, which is basically our SVG data extraction. After the SVG data extraction and our table data is within the folder, then we can proceed and basically create a copy of the entire folder. And this is basically what our script does. It creates an entire backup of the folder. So let's have a look at basic disaster recovery. Important to understanding these key concepts. So why is disaster recovery required? And the answer is for business continuity. We can basically define this as the capability of an organization to continue to deliver their products and services at a predefined given time, and also at acceptable levels. Where we have an incident, a disaster incident that's happened, we want to be able to continue to do business as usual. And this is where business continuity planning is very important, and is basically the key concept as to why we need disaster recovery in the first place. Then just a couple of key terminologies. Now, the recovery point objective is basically defined as the maximum targeted period of time in which a transactional data can be lost due to a service being down. And this is then defined by the particular company, and it basically measures the maximum time which recent data might have been permanently lost in the event of a major incident, and is not necessarily a direct measure of the quantity of the loss. So these are the key concepts. Then also recovery time objective is important to understand. This is the targeted amount of time that may pass while the service is down and a business process may not be available to the particular customer, and it's then restored after a disaster in order to avoid the downtime within a particular business. Then disaster recovery plans. Now, these are broad concepts that basically covers the broad aspects of DR and where they occur. The first one we'll have a look at is data center disaster recovery plans, which is basically happening within a normal data center. Now, this is where you would consider to do hosting for your customer, and where the data center itself will then deploy certain strategies that will ensure that the data center has got proper DR in place. For example, they would look after 24/7 security, server security, monitoring of these servers, firewalls, threat responses, etc. Physical security will also be covered, yeah, where access controls to the building, the CCTV cameras, access control via biometrics, etc., will be deployed to make sure that the environment itself is secure. Nobody can just walk in there and do whatever they want. Then the staff inside these buildings are basically the technicians that will look after the environment and basically address any issues that happens at any given point in time. Backup systems will be in place, such as HVAC systems, UPSs, etc., power backups, etc. Then offsite redundancy is generally also deployed by these big data centers, meaning that if a particular site goes down, they've got two other sites, for example, that can take over from that site if it's down. So that's full-blown disaster recovery, where they probably have these centers in different continents in some cases. So if Africa is down, Europe will take over, and you basically assured that your data will always be up and running when you are hosting with these type of companies. So that's basically a data center disaster recovery plan. Then a data backup plan is the plan that most of us is familiar with. And this is basically ensuring that backups are regularly monitored. So this is some features that I'm just mentioning as far as data backup disaster recovery plans is concerned. And basically also using the 3-2-1 backup rule, where you're keeping 3 copies of your data, 2 copies on different backup mediums, where one would be a server, for example, the other one could be a digital audio tape. And then, very important, one of these copies will be kept off-site. So in the event that something goes wrong with the actual site, it's down due to political unrest, it's down due to fire, etc., etc. It's very important to store one of these backup copies off-site. Then we can also back up cloud services. This also forms part of this feature of this particular backup plan. And then backing up all our devices, and then also testing our data on a regular basis. It's very important to make sure that you test your DR. Don't just assume it's working. Make sure that you run the test. Some of our companies that we work with does this on a regular basis, like, for example, every 6 months. Some of them does it every year, but it's very important to make sure that you test your data. So in other words, destroy all your data, then use your backups to restore the data, and make sure that your DR is basically solid. Second or third form of disaster recovery plans that we may get is virtual disaster recovery plans, where we could be using virtual machines or environments to basically restore our entire server environment. So in other words, we can back up our entire server environment by using this one in particular I like, because you can basically restore your entire environment, not just your data, but the actual server environment as well. And the typical features of these includes it can run anywhere, replication of your entire Sage X3 environment is possible. can be restored to any device on any geographic location. So the VM can be restored, for example, from Europe into Africa or vice versa if required. And then we're also less dependent on physical IT infrastructure when we're using VMs. So we're running a reduced amount of servers, for example, where those servers are generally virtualized in a VM environment. Then hot site disaster recovery is probably the most expensive form of disaster recovery that you can find. It's a form of DRaaS, DRaaS, or disaster recovery as a service, whereby a second facility is basically created to run your Sage X3 server environment. And it's basically replicated to the T in this particular environment. Somebody not on mute there. If you can just mute yourself, I'll appreciate that. So the cost of the solution is also quite astronomical, and it's very expensive to run a hot site disaster recovery.
Is it just me or everyone else can't hear you? I can't hear you, Renier.
Oh my word! Thank you.
Renier, are you there?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Was I muted somewhere down the line?
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Just checking.
Oh my word!
I think just go up one back.
Okay.
On this, maybe take it from the top.
Oh wow! So sorry about that, guys. That's and I was actually saying it's. Thank you very much for letting me know. Let's go back to the top. Yeah.
The last part you stopped at was at hot site.
Hot site.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was okay. Awesome. Okay, great. So let's continue from hot site. Thank you for letting me know I was muted there. I don't know how I got muted. Somebody muted me, or I muted myself, maybe. I don't know how that happened, but either way, thanks for letting me know. Okay, so basically, hot site. Let's cover hot site. Hot site again. So our hot site disaster recovery is basically our most expensive form of disaster recovery, and this is typically where we would have a copy of our existing environment on the hot site environment. It's a form of DRaaS, or disaster recovery as a service, whereby a second facility is basically created that will basically mirror our infrastructure and Sage X3 server environment. It's also the most expensive form of disaster recovery, but it's used by a lot of big companies whereby they cannot afford to be down for whatever reason, and effectively they would use this method of disaster recovery, where it's too costly for them to be have any form of downtime. They would then deploy hot site disaster recovery. Cold site is the flip side to that, which is basically a cheaper form of hot site DR, where you basically lease the infrastructure, or companies lease the infrastructure and the servers and other hardware, and also obviously in a physical geographical location, and it's used when they need it. So our automated folder backup script can then fit into any of these DR plans that we've mentioned here. And in my opinion, it should. It gives you a little bit of redundancy also as far as your form of disaster recovery that you're using. And then we'll have a look at who should consider automated folder backups. And in my opinion, the answer is simple. Everyone should consider this. Be it huge data or small data, it's very important to have a complete folder backup, as I'll explain in the next point. So Our Sage X3 customers, our business partners, our Sage salespeople should consider this for their VMs. They can easily automate their own backups within their VMs. And even our Sage X3 consultants should consider this, because you could also have environments that you create for customers that you want to back up and replicate or restore at certain particular points. And then by using this form of backup, you also get a very good compression ratio on the zip file. So why is it important to create these backups? And the simple reason is the standard Sage X3 folders contains a lot of key data, not just the actual SVG data extraction, but data such as your blank file definitions, your menu structures, specific source code, custom reports, crystal reports that's created within the folder, table definitions, and then also a lot of system generated code. So generally you would want to create a backup of the entire folder. And this is why it's important to create a complete folder backup. So it then also provides the means of recovery for customers that has no DR in place, and it's very cost effective. Basically, it's not going to cost you anything to roll this out and have this in place. And then it's also reliable. You can see the results after running this, and you know immediately whether it was successful or not. And then also running a test every once in a while is obviously also very important here. So make sure that you test the data every once in a while. Is it time consuming? Yes and no. It can be time consuming depending on the size of the actual data. So in my opinion, for example, where SVG data extractions is bigger than 40 gigabytes, you should consider running those once a month, for example, and making sure that you just keep a folder, a general folder backup if you've got a huge amount of data. And then, for example, where the SVG data extraction runs longer than, say, 8 hours, for example, it can be very disruptive to normal business hours when the SVG run into normal working hours. And that could basically mean that the business can't operate because the SVG data extraction is busy running in the background. So very important to manage this correctly and make sure that you time your SVG data extractions so that you can make sure that the SVG data extraction doesn't run into production hours or working hours. Then yeah, there is some limitations in terms of size again. So once the folder gets too big, the bigger the folder, the longer the SVG is going to take to run. And this is where it's very important to basically be aware of these limitations. But in my experience, I've found that a lot of companies out in the field, they've got data less than 20 gigabytes, where you can actually run this form of solution, and less than 40 gigabytes in actual fact, in my opinion. So you can easily then run this form of DR. Then we'll have a look at the actual process of folder backups. So first thing that we've got to do is run a SVG data extraction. And this can also be automated inside X3 using a batch process, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later. And then after that, we'll obviously run our folder backup script. So it should be scheduled to run after business hours. Very important. The SVG data extraction, for example, will be very disruptive in that you cannot have anybody connected to the environment when you run a complete folder extraction or data extraction. That means the table data from your database is basically put into the SVG data extraction. So therefore, it's very important to make sure that nobody is connected during that time, and therefore it should be run after hours. Very important to run it after hours. So the Sage X3 folder contains other key elements that I've mentioned, like bank file definitions, etc. I'm sure you guys were paying attention, but those should also be backed up as a whole. In other words, the SVG data extraction on its own is not enough to be considered a complete folder backup. So we've covered limitations. I'm not going to go through that again. Then the actual process is basically covered through four key steps, and we'll go through them. So the first one is obviously to run our SVG data extraction. After that, we'll copy all folder contents. And this is, I've explained to you guys why it's important to run all the folder. Then we zip this. For example, if we zip a 40 gigabyte folder, we can get that down to about 800 megabytes. So it's important to zip that data, because if you add up 40 gigabytes times 100 is 4 terabytes of data. Now, if you take 10% of that, it's 4 gigabytes. So 4 gigabytes is a lot better than 4 terabytes of data, for example. So it's very important to zip the contents. Make sure you use the utilities such as 7-zip that does parity checking at the end of the zip process to make sure that that file is still intact. And then we'll copy the backup that we've made into a backup server to make sure that it's kept on the backup server, and from the backup server we can have offsite backups, etc., as we mentioned before. So then important to make sure that you've got a copy of that backup, and you can use that 3-to-1 principle that I've explained to you in the previous slides. So the SVG data extraction process is probably best to show within the environment itself, but this is a very key step, as you know, because the table data is basically extracted there. It runs inside X3 and can be automated using the batch server, and it runs as a batch task. The automation runs inside X3. In other words, we can automate the SVG data extraction to run at certain intervals, and that's done via setting up a recurring task on the docs extra function, which is basically our SVG data extraction function. And then the data that's extracted is obviously our table data that's extracted when we run a SVG data extraction. So guys, now we're going to review this whole process within a VM, and I think our timing is quite good. So it's looking good. And I'll open the VM. Make sure I've got the VM open. Here we've got the VM. Just want to make sure I can see the, sorry guys. Just want to make sure I can see the, oh, I guess it doesn't matter. So I just want to run through this script with you. So I'm not using pauses here. I'm using a timeout setting, which is basically 10 seconds. So it's just going to count down for 10 seconds where this command is in the script. And then basically here we dynamically get set the folder date. It uses the 3 key arguments basically to get the folder backup directory, which is the first argument. Second argument is basically our X3 application folder name, so wherever that's installed. And then the final one is the folder that we want to backup. Like, for example, if we want to create a backup of live, we could create a backup of live and specify that argument there. We then create a new folder name, which is basically set equal to our parameter that we use there. Like, for example, live will be used here as the folder name if we're using live. Once that's run, we basically create a backup of the X3 pub folder and the main folder. Very important to back up both. The publication folder is as your main folder simply because it contains all your publication data, and without those publication data you're not going to have any screens, etc. So very important to make sure that you've got your publication data in there as well. Then the contents is copied from basically our existing folder into the folder that we've created, and it's also done for the X3_pub folder, and that's also copied into the new folder that we've created. And then basically we fire up the 7-zip self-extracting executable. It's important to make sure that you specify the path for this program. For example, if you've installed it on the D drive, you have to change this in order to make sure that it runs correctly. So very important to test this. And basically once that's done, the self-extracting executable is created successfully. We can then delete the contents of the existing folder. We don't want to be keeping 40 gigabytes of data, for example. And that's it. Then it basically finishes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this and deploy it and show you guys how to do it. So we'll take the script and basically copy it into our scripts directory in this case. And I'm going to just open Sage here. You'll see that within Sage, we've created this directory that we call, there's the Mongo log file rotation that we did before. Now we're going to have the folder backup script. And we can then basically automate this. So I'm just going to copy this path so I can basically show you guys how to run this. I'm going to open a administrative command prompt. We'll cd into that directory where our script is. And then I'll also show you guys how to automate it using the Windows Start Scheduler. Very similar to the MongoDB log file rotation script, but yeah, we'll just use, I'll just illustrate for you how the script basically executes. So I'm just going to enter the script there, folder backup script. It will basically time out. I can also press a key to continue, so we don't have to read that. And yeah, it's basically gonna fire up. Now I didn't specify any parameters, so it's not gonna work because the arguments aren't there. So now you can see it's not gonna run successfully. So it's very important to have these in place. I'm basically gonna cancel the script. Trying to cancel it. Let's just cancel it like that. So I'm going to run it again. And this time around, we'll provide the arguments that's required, the correct arguments. So inside our folders directory, we can create, or inside our Sage directory even, we can create a backup folder. So let's just create a backup folder here that we call backup. A probably more appropriate place would be inside folders, but we can also create it here. Let's just call it backups like that, for example. So this is going to be our backup folder. So this would be the first argument that we'll pass to our script, and then it'll create the self-extracting executable in this directory. And we're going to run this, and then we'll continue with the presentation and possibly deal with some questions that you guys may have. And I'm hoping there's a few, so ask a few questions, please, guys. So then I also just want to, let me just use Notepad++ to quickly copy all these parameters. Just copying it on another session of Notepad++. So I just also want the path again to the scripts. So I'm going to copy that. Okay, scripts, got that. And then the backup directory we want. So it's this one, backups. So that's going to be an argument. And make sure it's followed by a slash right at the end. So you need that slash included in your parameter. Otherwise, the parameters aren't going to work correctly. And the final one is our actual folder. So that would be under our solutions. And this is our folders directory. So that's going to be the second argument that we passed. And the final one is obviously just the seed folder. This one only contains a seed folder, so we're just going to use the seed folder there. So let's fire up the script correctly this time around. So we're just going to open the script again. So it's folder backup space, our first argument that we're going to pass, which is basically this one. So this is the backup directory that we've created. It's not pasting it in there. I'm just going to type it. Space, followed by our folders path. Let's just try and copy it again. It's also not working. Let me just type it. It's not case sensitive, so Windows isn't case sensitive, so you don't really need that. Space, the name of the folder, and the name of our folder is going to be seed. So now here you'll see it run properly after we've basically used our three arguments. So let's continue, kick that off. Basically, here you can see what it's done. It's created a backup directory inside our backups folder that we've created, which is basically seed, and it's date stamped with today's date, the folder that it's created. And there was a path issue. There was a path issue. There was a path issue that was created. Maybe a good thing that we create that we have that path issue, because that's the section that runs for about 20-30 seconds. So we can easily correct that by, I'll show you guys how to do that, and you can basically do it yourselves. So let's just go and have a look at where we had an issue. So typically the best way to debug these, so say for example you're in the environment where you've deployed this this file, you can then easily just go and replace the timeout settings with pauses. For example, where I think our issue is happening, yeah, it's somewhere here. So what I want to do is, for example, display what's happening here. So I could put in a pause there, and that's just going to pause indefinitely until I've hit the key. It's not too important. I can assure you I've tested this, and there's something small that's just creating like a slash or something like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to echo the name. This is going to display the name of this parameter. So I want to echo first parameter. Let's just call this first parameter. First folder. First folder. And then you just want to echo that name. And we'll just put it in a remark so that you don't get an error. And that's the one that we want to replace. So I just want to see what that is, for example. And it's either this one or this one that's creating the issue. So I'm also going to echo that. In actual fact, let's just echo it rather than remark, because a remark is not going to do anything. So let's just echo that one. Then what I'll do is I'll record you a little separate recording in which I'll show you what I did to sort this out. But essentially, the result of this would be we would be left with a, and I just want to make sure it's the right one that we've got open here. No, it's the one on the, just back that, copy that, paste it into our scripts directory. So the changes that we made is basically the same as in this one. And replace the file. So let's just quickly run that. And this is the way you would debug this. I'm going to stop after this if it's not evident what the issue is. If it's evident, I'll fix it and we'll move on. Otherwise, if it's not evident, I'm going to record a little video for you guys, and I'll share that video on the blog. Please make sure that you like the blog. That way we get an indication of the content that we're providing and whether we should continue doing this or not. So basically, let's run this and just have a look at what's happening. So we're going to run that. I should have kept that open, but let's just go into the Sage and then scripts. All the backup scripts. First one, first parameter we're going to pass is this one. You'll probably find it's going to be something like double slashes or one slash missing or something like that. Sorry, that's not script, it's backups. Backups. and then the folder directory, which is basically Sage XV ERP V12 in this case, what they called it, and then folders like that. Very important that that's exactly correct, otherwise it won't work. And we're going to back up the seed folder. So let's have a look and see what's happening. So now folder backup name is created. That's cool. That's a correct date. And yeah, looks right. That looks right. Ah, there. Okay, so there must have been a typo or something. So this is going to run for a bit. I think it was a typo. Sorry, guys. That's why a copy and paste works the best, and automating it with the Windows Task Scheduler is obviously the best way to do it. So now it's going to create a complete folder backup by running, and once it's run, you'll see that it'll create a self-extracting executable, but you can clearly see it's busy copying there, copying away. So at this point in time, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move back to the Q&A session, and hopefully you guys have some questions, and we can interact and basically just go through those questions. So let's go to our presentation. We can get back to this slide. And then I'll also show you how to automate the script. Hopefully we don't run out of time. I'm sure we can. Is there any questions in the chat? Let's have a look. I'm not sure. Andrew, are you still around, or have you? I know Andrew had to pop out quite urgently, but I think he is still around. Andrew, if you can hear me, it would be great if you could just share whether there's any questions in the chat. Okay, I see there is. So there's one question being asked here. We have a site with over 300 gigabytes of SVG size. So in a case where you've got 300 gigabytes, SVG data extraction is going to run a very, very long time. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you test it, if you can, in a test environment. So in other words, you're not going to affect your production environment. So run your SVG data extraction in a test environment. And run it over a weekend, for example, then time it, use a timer, time it, and say, okay, this SVG runs for 12 hours or whatever the case may be. You can then say, okay, I need a backup of my production folder. How am I going to get that? And I would like to do a SVG data extraction argument's sake. You then can do that, but make sure that you plan it over a off time where you've got public holidays or something like that, and you can then run it during that time. If that's not possible, it's not the end of the world. The SVG data extraction on its own is not the end of the world. The reason I say that, you can have SQL backups that does as effective backups as the SVG data extraction. However, you should still back up your entire folder. So, because otherwise you're not going to have your bank file definitions, your table structures, etc., etc. So those elements also needs to be backed up, and it's very important to make sure that you have those backed up. Then we've got another question. Hi, is it possible to get this script? Yes, it is possible. I'm going to share it with all our business partners, which is basically you guys, on the blog. So I'll share the blog with you right at the end of the presentation. Please go and like the blog. It gives me an indication that you guys like this presentation. And then also please just rate the webinar, if you don't mind. We'll also share that a link with you at the end of the presentation. So yes, you can definitely get the script. We'll share that with you. Yes, I'm going to share the blog with you guys right at the end of the presentation, and you guys can go and like it and basically keep an eye on the blog, because I'm going to be updating the blog. The blog is going to be fully updated by close of business Friday this week. So make sure that you guys keep an eye on the blog. And what's the recommended maximum recommended limit for the DB size? We haven't actually, that's a very difficult question. We haven't actually reached it yet. We've got a customer that's got a 2 terabyte database, and they're still churning away. So I don't think there is a limit to the maximum DB size. As the technology of SQL and Oracle improves, you'll find that these databases are just getting bigger and bigger. For example, 25 years ago, we thought that a database that was 16 gigabytes big was massive. Now it's quite commonplace to have a database of 1 terabyte, which is 1,000 gigabytes. And 15 years ago, it was difficult to conceptualize that you'll have databases this, but in the future, I'd like to think that you'll even have petabyte databases, which is going to be insane in terms of size. But yeah, there's no real maximum size limit, in my opinion, at this stage. But I would say you can always optimize your data. In other words, have your current fiscal year's data open and archive your other data. Run it in a legacy-based system, for example, where you can run consolidated reporting in, and you can basically consolidate from your live system into that environment if you have to, or something like that. In other words, split your current fiscal year from your archive or your historic fiscal years where you need to do reporting. So various ways of doing that. If the company can afford it, set up a data farm where you can basically run your legacy reports on a similar environment, a replica environment, if the company can afford it. If they can't, there's other ways of doing it, but that's one way of getting around big data. It's generally the companies that's got big data has also got big money, most of them. So if they've got big data, you'll probably find they've also got a big budget, and they could probably afford looking after their data in better ways. And if you're going towards the cloud, it becomes more and more simplified to do all that and almost to do it on the fly. How can we reduce SVG size to reduce backup time? That is a very good question. And in actual fact, you can look at all your temporary tables and you can basically purge those temporary tables. You don't need those temporary tables. For example, the one customer I found had a 500 gigabyte database. At nearer inspection, we found that the ABAT RQT table, which is basically a temporary table where we store the batch processes that run, that table grew to 95% of the size of the entire database. So by deploying simple folder maintenance or table maintenance, they could have shrunk the size of their database. So very important to make sure that you do regular table maintenance. And by doing that, you'll find that the size of your SVG will be reduced dramatically, which will reduce the amount of backup time it'll take to run the SVG data extraction. So in other words, don't extract stuff that's not required. Make sure that you do regular table maintenance. Then there's another question. Is there a roadmap to replace the current data extraction with the console SQL dump function? That is being looked at. It's being discussed at L3 level. There's nothing that I'm aware of in the coming roadmap that basically addresses that. But essentially, that is a very key point and a very important point, and I think we should have that replaced. There were teams looking at that, so I'm certain Sage is definitely considering that. So a very good question there. For the client that runs almost 24/7, what's the best way or time for a backup? That's a very good question. And in their case, the simple answer is there isn't. There isn't the best time for somebody that operates 24/7. But you'll find there's always a window of opportunity. And the important thing is to plan it and plan it correctly. For example, when will it be least disruptive for this particular customer that runs 24/7 to run this? You can then do it. If the data is not that big and you're just going to take 2-3 hours worth of downtime, I'm sure you can schedule it somewhere. And be it on a public holiday or the time that they're historically less busy during the month, they can run it during that time. So various ways of doing that, but no easy answer there. Okay, then I always had this doubt how Sage X3 works with SQL backups. Example, the SQL backup was taken yesterday, and for some reason we restore the SQL backup that was taken yesterday. However, the application data is as of today. Will there be any issues if we do something like this? Okay, so if I restore, understand correctly, you've accidentally restored yesterday, or there should have been a reason. The reason we restore, just to explain DR, is obviously some form of incident happens, a DR incident. For example, there's a ransomware incident. And this is where it's impossible, where it's important to have and it's impossible not to have proper DR in place. You have to make sure that you have proper DR in place. If a company that got hit by ransomware, for example, and the entire database is encrypted, had proper offsite backups, the net effect of that is going to be the offsite backups would not have been encrypted by the ransomware. They can then restore the backup offsite and get that environment up and running. And let's say they're using a hot site disaster recovery. That means that they can immediately switch over to the hot site. They've got lots of money and they can afford it. They can then switch over to the hot site, which means that environment is immediately going to be up and running. They can then delete the database that was encrypted with ransomware, and then also make sure that they step up their security features and capabilities to make sure that the new sites aren't hit with ransomware. So very important to make sure that you cater for that. So then your data will be restored, including your application data will be restored, and everything will be restored. So when you restore a folder or you import a folder using the management console, it will replace your data within your database for that particular folder schema. And therefore, I hope I've answered that question. But when you restore a folder backup, it will replace the schema for you. Okay, completely for you. I see Andrew's got his hands up. Andrew, you've got a question?
Thanks, Renier. I'm looking at the time. I think you need to
Start
do your
wrapping up.
conclusions.
Okay. 100%. Let's quickly go back to the image.
Yeah. And also, if the other questions can be answered, maybe we can do an article and then answer them and post them on Sage City.
No problem.
I think I'll remember the survey as well.
100%. Let's quickly share this survey with you guys and just quickly have a look at where we at. Oh, we can see it's finished. So here we can see it's copied 106,000 files there. I put in the pause. Damn it. Okay, this is where it's running the SVG data extraction. So that's great. So this wouldn't run for too long. Let it run, and I'll show you guys. I'll record a separate video, but you'll see that the SVG data extraction is going to be created inside this folder here that we've created inside this backups folder. There it is. After running the script, it's going to clean this up, and we'll just be left with this SVG data extraction file. It's currently zipping it, so basically that's the process that it's busy with. So if you refresh every once in a while, that figure should grow, and it should be more or less. Let's see what the size of this folder is. This should be about 5 gigabytes. So I think, guys, let's wrap up. Andrew's right. I don't want to go over time here. So let's wrap up with this. What I'll do is exactly what Andrew said, is I'll answer your questions that I haven't answered in the blog. So please make sure that you go to the blog, and then also make sure that I'm going to copy this blog for you guys and just paste it in the chat. I'll do that in a sec. And then there's 2 links that I'm going to copy for you in the chat quickly. Please copy them. The one is the actual blog. This is where you'll find the script. So make sure that you copy this link. Please like that if you really liked it. If you didn't like it, then don't like it, obviously. But if you did like the presentation, kindly leave us a like on this blog. We'll appreciate that. And then also the survey, just complete the survey as well. That gives us an indication of how we're doing. And if we're doing well, we're going to continue with these types of presentations going into the future. I believe it adds value, and I'm sure you guys do too. So I'm just going to end the show, minimize this, and basically just go to copy that link for you.
Sorry, Rennie, I've already put the questionnaire on the chat. So if people can just take a moment to complete the survey.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for posting that. I'm going to post the blog, and then if you guys can just do that survey for us as well. It's not going to take you too long. It literally takes seconds to complete the survey, so please just do the survey. There's the link for the blog. Make sure that you go check this out. I'll be updating it up to Friday, so please make sure that you guys go check out the blog. And that's it from me. I think we've run out of time. I don't know how the self-extracting executable is doing. It's on 22%. So yeah, timing is more or less, but at least we got through the key content. And guys, yeah, if you have any further questions, just post them in the chat. I'll make sure to post them on the blog, and I'll have a little Q&A section there where I'll answer all your questions, as the ones I've answered, plus the ones that you'll ask as well. And that's it. Over to you, Andrew. Thank you very much, everyone. Andrew, are you there? You can do the honors and wrapping up. See, there's one question. Let's have a look. Who's got their hand up? Oh, somebody dropped their hand. Okay, guys. If there's no other questions, I think we'll carry on. If anybody else has a question, just drop it in the chat, and I'll make sure to update the blog for you guys, and just make sure that you go ahead and like it there. I'm gonna do Andrew's job today because I don't know why he's muted. Andrew, if you stepped away, it's understandable. Just like to thank every one of you for joining the blog, for joining the webinar, and just keep an eye on the blog, and I'll post everything on there that you guys need to run the script. And please deploy it for all your customers, specifically the smaller ones that have no DR in place. A great way of basically creating easy and quick DR for your customers. And you can use it for yourself as well. So the consultants out there that wants to create a backup of their own environments can set this up on their own images and basically just create a copy of their work. So I'm going to thank all of you. I think we'll close with this and say thank you very much. Have a great day further, and keep an eye on the future blogs, and see you guys around. Thank you very much for joining. Cheers, guys, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.